Welcome to the Kitchen Table in Sunshine podcast, brought to you by the Bibi blog. It was September 30th and my birthday. I was 20 years old and I had been married for a year and a half. My husband Kirk and I lived in Boca Raton, Florida, in an apartment near Florida Atlantic University where he was finishing his master's in ceramics. Kirk was a potter, a painter, a sculptor, and a cartoonist. He also played the French horn and guitar and stood 6'5" tall in his bare feet. He was as exciting and unpredictable as he was tall. And that September 30th, he had invited a few people over to our place to help celebrate my birthday. It was night, and we all sat around in a circle. I was talking a lot, I remember, and suddenly stopped. "I feel like I'm on stage," I said. "That's because you're an actress." Kirk's new manager had said this to me, and everyone laughed. The next day was to be very fabulous because he had booked Kirk a show in a major Miami gallery, but that night it was my turn to shine. We all took advantage of being together by proceeding to get exceedingly stoned. Good times with good friends. I remember looking at their candlelit faces and thinking, I wonder what I'll be doing when I turn 40, 20 years from now, 40. That's when I'll really come into my own. The thought surprised me. It came out of the blue. Then I forgot about it, and I went on with my life, no longer as a teenager. Eighteen and a half years later, I walked up the stairs of a clapboard house in Vancouver, British Columbia. I was a student at the Vancouver Film School and immersed in doing pre-production for my short documentary project about healing and magic. My director of photography had recommended his father to compose the music. He told me his dad was a musician, that he had played dobro and steel slide guitar with the Zydeco country rock band Blue Northern. He said they'd won Canadian Grammys. Well, that sounded pretty good to me, and the stairs I walked up belonged to that dad. Two small yellow birds perched on the branch of a small tree that grew alongside the wooden steps of the house. I remember being struck by how close the birds were to my face. And then I saw that the porch had many objects hanging everywhere. There were tiny bones and stones attached to what looked like ropes made out of sage-grass, and larger metal chimes. What had been a gentle breeze picked up just before I reached the door. Jimmy was part Irish, but mostly Choctaw and Cherokee. This gave him fierce, chiseled features, long blue-black hair, and bottomless green eyes. Yeah. I was meeting one of the big loves of my life. Oh, oh. Okay, flash forward about a year. September 30th, my birthday. I'm waking up and Jimmy is on my right and we're in Taos. It's my birthday and I was 40 years old. We had driven from Vancouver in quest of material and people for a documentary we were working on together. It was to be about Native American healers and how their work was considered to be a gift that came from the earth, their land. Jimmy had come up with the title, A Sense of Place, and I loved that and wanted so much to understand more of what it meant. So did Telefilm Canada, who had funded part of this road trip. We had breakfast that morning at a local coffee shop, and then we got in our car and headed down the road. We were going to the Taos Pueblo. We sought to interview was a man by the name of Tell Us Good Morning. I'd asked Jimmy to repeat the name when I first heard it, and he did, slowly. Tell us good morning. He was head chief of the Pueblo as well as the leader of the Peyote Church of America. Jimmy was a member, but he had yet to meet the man. We had to park a distance from the Pueblo. No cars were allowed. We walked down a long dirt road. We passed a medium-sized, off-white, short-haired dog. I thought it was asleep, and then I saw its wagging tail. It stirred up the dust into swirls in the air around his body. We finally came to a house, in front of which sat a fierce-looking man in a lawn chair. Jimmy said, "Tell us good morning," and the man gruffly pointed toward some houses further down the road, but not until after quickly giving me the once-over. It was then that I started feeling as if maybe it had been a mistake for me to enter this Pueblo. I keenly felt the history of the Americas, and I felt at that moment that I represented the entire white race. We continued walking until we came upon a house surrounded by lush greenery. Now, understand, this was the only greenery around, and it stood out in that desert atmosphere. An opening in the green revealed what lay beyond. It was a gorgeous flower garden with precisely laid out rocks forming a spiraling path through it. It was enormous and very green inside. A tiny old lady in overalls holding gardening shears stood in the midst of rose bushes wearing a huge straw hat. As soon as she saw us, she gestured for us to come in. Jimmy went, but I couldn't budge. I felt again, as I had a few minutes earlier, too white and therefore not worthy of going any further. I watched while the old lady and Jimmy started up an animated conversation. Then she looked up and took a look at me standing outside her arbor. There was a concerned look on her face, and then she smiled sweetly and gestured for me to come in. That time I did. I have to say that the most peculiar thing happened then, and I'll never forget it as long as I live. As soon as I stepped through the arbor, the scent of flowers, of the jasmine and the roses hung all about me, and the space inside looked to be the size of a huge natural arena. I found myself starting to run, and as I did, my body felt smaller and smaller, so that by the time I reached the old lady, I was looking up into her eyes. They were huge and brown, and they danced and sparkled as she held her arms wide open for me to come into. As she hugged me, I was a 5-year-old child coming home to her grandma. She threw her head back and laughed, and it sounded like bells. Then, boom, I was towering over her, but she wouldn't let go of my hand. Jimmy was also laughing, and we all turned to see a very old, tall, and elegant man emerge from the house that the garden protected. He stood so strong and so straight, and he had 2 long gray braids that fell down his back with feathers hanging from their tips. This was Tell Us Good Morning, and the lady was his wife, Pauline. Tell Us, as he asked us to call him, was quite impressed when Jimmy told him it was my 40th birthday. Every September 30th, the San Geronimo Festival takes place at the Pueblo. This is the Pueblo people's most sacred day of the year, when the harvest comes in and the spirits are thanked. It's also the day when the people are shown their shadow side through the behavior of the sacred clowns who come out of the kivas. The rest of that day and night were magical. That night, I remembered what I'd thought 20 years earlier, how I'd wondered what I'd be doing now. I was really finally grown up. I was worthy. It was my 40th birthday. It was the San Geronimo Festival, and I had been given the distinction of being the guest of honor of Tell Us Good Morning, the head chief of the Taos Pueblo, and his wife Pauline, their main medicine woman. This is dedicated to the memory of Jimmy Wilson,